So we're looking at landscape archaeology, upstanding remains, looking at crux frame buildings last week and the week before, a tiny bit today. So obviously we've had a lot of interest in this subject, so I want to crack on. So we're going to still be looking at timber buildings and their framework and how the panels go in and all the rest of it. A good few nice color examples, and some of these examples have actually been provided by Pam. So it's a shame she's not with us, but it's good that this is being recorded. So if we move on to where we need to be. So we've obviously done all this, and last week we went off on this building. We disappeared on this one. And I'm just going to double check everything. Oh, yes, we got to get to this as well. So nice little bit of an introduction. So where were we last week? I know Bill made the comment it was very intense, which it should be. So we were looking at crux frame buildings, and I want to take a little bit today, a little look. So if I get this little page out of my file. So I want to look today at some of the infill in regards to the panels. And we've got some nice color illustrations, and we're going to look at jettying. And there's an image of jettying in regards to Abergavenny that I wanted to show you last week, but it didn't happen. So when we think about these really old buildings, we do get collections of really old buildings, usually in the north part of England. There are examples dotted around Cymru, and we get one or two examples in St. Fagans. Thank you very much. There, in regards to medieval buildings, that the timber frame structures have survived. Some of the finest examples for me in my visits across the country are not in like the likes of Shrewsbury or Chester or anywhere like that. It's in York, and the accommodation is now nicely booked for our York trip next year in a really nice place near the cathedral. So that's a nice bit of news for a couple of you actually going on that event. And with regards to the survival of these buildings, we mentioned the figure of over 1,400 of these buildings over a certain area of Britain. So there might be medieval timber structures. Top of my head, there might be up to 3,000 examples across England and Wales, and maybe lots of other examples in Scotland. But that's quite a lot of survivals of timber buildings from the medieval period. And when you think about it, cities have gone up in flames. When you look at the likes of Coventry, that went up in flames. That used to have a lot of old buildings that went up in flames. Second World War. London went up in flames in 1666. All the wooden buildings went. So we're very lucky to get these examples surviving. And some examples survive in very odd places, down little lanes, in the middle of roads and all the rest of it. Again, this is an example that was showing in front of us, the oldest building in Wobley, Herefordshire. Now we're looking at more or less a complete form of the crux frame building, except it's supported on padstones. Remember we looked last week, and I mentioned that we've got the full crux and the base crux. Now this is a bit of a tie between a full crux and a base crux in that it's got pads to support the timber. And I mentioned last week, unfortunately with full crux, the timber goes all the way down to the ground and rots and all the rest of it. One or two of those examples left in the whole of Britain. But if you think about being supported with a little bit of a pad, then we could say this is more or less a full crux survival in Wobley, going into the 1400s, maybe around there or just beyond. Now, to sort of give a little bit of an example of people's love for these very old buildings, very interesting buildings, and the use of timber. This is a rather interesting one. This is the sort of the gable end of a building in Derbyshire, a place called Wirksworth High Street, Derbyshire. Now, what you can imagine, somebody's decided that they're going to demolish all the building, and in the gable end, pine end, what they've decided to do is they've just decided to keep the frame, and you can see the frame, it's rotting away, but you can see the frame there. And you can see all the tie beams, sort of just bring in some of those words in again. Let's just try and get my, oh, look at that. We've got that in much larger. Let's get it. Let's get the tie beams in there. Let's get some of the words in there. So this is that bit of a tie beam. All little bits of tie beam in this sort of structure coming up. And is this a full cruck? Well, it looks like it's a full cruck, but it's obviously over time there's been some changes. Now, what we're very much interested in today is the paneling in between. Let's sort of clear that little bit in this stuff about paneling. You need to put a panel in there, because if you don't, you can have a lot of wind blowing into the building. So that's where your panels come in, on your gables, on your eave walls, your side walls as well. If I am breaking up, you'll have the recording, so just go with the flow. So don't worry about it. If I'm breaking up for too long, you need to let me know. Anyway, carrying on, what we do have when we look, I want to get into this document that we had started looking at. So I'm just going to see why is this not working a minute. Hang on a minute. I need to stop the sharing. I need to see what the problem is, and we need to go in. That's right. That's why it's not letting me. So let's sort of screen share again. And how is it sounding now, Richard?
It sounds fine.
Good, Rich. That's what I like to hear. There's nothing wrong with a bit of the old fine. So what I need to do is get to where I need to be. Right, last week we were looking at the paneling, and when we were looking at the paneling, we were talking about Watland daub. So what you might find, if I can get my little annotation bar in here, you would find that you would have these would be, there'd be a really nice tight wattle frame. There'd be 1, 2, 3, 4 uprights. This would be pre-made and then would be slotted into that framework, and then it would be daubed over. Wattle and daub would be used, and we also mentioned last week, in some of this framework, you might find little grooves where the wattle framework is nicely placed in there. So undoubtedly, the area of the country where the timber framing achieved the highest standards in terms of decorative devices, these are the decorative devices that we mentioned last week, the decorative framework are places like Hall in the Wood, Bolton. Now, we do actually, what we did last week, we actually went and I said, right, we're going to stop there. So we got Hall in the Wood. Now, I do actually have some nice color examples of Hall in the Wood. And what we said last week was this thing of being very elaborate, using all of these different forms that were available that we mentioned last week. And these buildings, when you look at the northwest, there's lots of these survivors. Probably there's lots of these survivors because, you know, they weren't extensively bombed in the Second World War. And there's not as much going on in the north as there is in the south. And what I mean by that is that you don't have the massive swathes of development that flatten buildings in the north as you do in the south. Not talking about a poor or rich. I'm just talking about they seem to respect where they are in the north rather than where they are in the south. So this building itself, I do actually have a little, I do actually have all of these replicated in color images. So we'll come on to that. This is the ancient high house in Staffordshire. So what we're talking about with dates, late 1500s, one place to actually go to find really interesting, weird, intriguing buildings, which is quite close to us, is in fact Tewkesbury. It's a nice place to go to, along with the cathedral as well. So this is the ancient house in Stafford. And again, you sort of start to think about William Shakespeare and all these other things. And actually, there's a link with Tewkesbury involving William Shakespeare, but you can find that out if you look around yourselves. So again, all this sort of really interesting paneling that we sort of looked at last week, and it's still being used. And again, when buildings continue in use, they're loved a little bit more. Now, Richard will understand this. When you go down the main high street of Barry, down Halton Road, by where Dan Evans used to be, right? If you look up, Richard, you can see some nice framework of some old windows and stuff. I know that's from the late Victorian period, but when buildings are respected and they continue in use, lots of these styles and frameworks and evolved medieval buildings still remain, as we see wonderful examples with the likes of York. Now, let's think about, let's go back to the other building a minute. Let's just sort of get up some nice color images coming up. So we also look at Little Morton in a short while. And when we think about all these buildings overall, we think about large boxes intricately related to smaller boxes, both horizontally and vertical, to create designs, to create areas that you might actually extensions to the buildings, like having gatehouses and garderobes and so on. All of these are going to be nicely decorated by timber work, similar to what you're seeing in front of us there. And what you are doing is seeing that above, because the buildings jetty out, we'll look at jettying as well, understand really what that means. You can have more room upstairs, more sense of design. So when we think about these designs that we're looking at, and this is actually a design from, let me remember, this is actually from Denmark, which we'll come on to in a moment. So the decoration and the elaborate forms offer a social message. You don't need to really do this. You don't need to, you don't need to be this intricate. You really don't need to have these panels decorated in this way. Surely a nice bit of wattle framework with a nice bit of daub on it will suffice, but these people are actually showing off. They're really showing off in Bolton. And again, they're showing off in Stafford. So instead of being plain, what they want to do is broadcast a rich form, a surface of elaboration, a social message. And this social message can tell other people of your wealth. Other words coming into this, the polite elevation of a building invariably presents a more decorated facade. So polite, plain, no, it's not going to be plain, it's going to be decorated. So in other words, this is another thing as well, is the front of the building might be really elaborate, but go around the back, it looks like plain. It's really plain. And wonderful Richard will know what I mean by this. In Barry, when we've got the development of our town hall in Barry into the 1900s, the front looks beautiful. The back was just brick. They didn't really bother with it. Isn't that right, Richard? Yeah. So this is not just an old thing. What you do, you broadcast who you are, your wealth, what you want to broadcast to people at the front as they enter the building. Doesn't really matter what's at the back. Now, one thing that we do find, this is a building from the Netherlands. Just double check, not the Netherlands, Denmark, Jutland in Denmark. And what you can clearly see with this is that the infill is not wattle and daub. It's something else. Here we go. Infill materials, other infill materials have also been recorded across the country and other parts of Europe. When the need arose to replace decaying infill or wattle and daub, many owners began progressively filling the panels with a more permanent material in the form of brick. So in other words, what you're talking about is that the timber structure of the building, that's taking the load, that's bearing whatever you need to bear. If you look at a crux frame building, the crux frame carries the burden. So it doesn't really matter what the rest of the framework is like, the crux frame carrying a burden. So whatever you put in between doesn't matter. You can put brick, you can put all sorts of wonderful things, other bits of timber and so on, panel it up, what have you, and so on. Though more widely available as a building material during the second half of the 1600s, brick had occasionally served as infill for timber framing, not just at that time, but in early times as well. When brick is available, and there's lots of brick available, it's really being used to create the infill. So in other words, you might look at a building like this. Now, this building itself, away from Denmark, this is a building at Malden in Essex. Now, even though we're looking at this being a jetty building and we're looking at wattle framework, you could probably get away with, in other parts of the country, actually filling the timber work in there with brick. Why not? Now, if you go back to the other image, back to Denmark, an infill technique using brick has got a specific name. It's called brick nogging. So brick nogging has been recorded as a historical use in some parts of our country, in Denmark, Netherlands, Germany in particular. But this has been recorded not just into the 1600s, but brick nogging as an infill form has been seen earlier, as far back into the 1400s. So instead of using wattle, daub, which eventually rots down, you might use this form that we're saying, brick nogging. In Leicestershire, for example, I haven't got an example to show you, but in Leicestershire, a few local examples of infilling have used thin sections of sandstone or limestone. So in other words, you've got lids of limestone and sandstone. You just chuck it into where you would have a wooden panel on the vertical, and that would just be placed in there with pegs, and that would suffice. So in other words, you're filling the voids with anything. In some parts of the country, they're actually using slate. So you're just putting in big flat panels of slate in there, job done. And then basically you might daub that over and that might suffice. And words like close studded panels. In all of these cases, the stone, in all of these cases, the brick, not in all the cases the brick, may I add, not in the Low Countries, but maybe here. In those cases of wattle, as we've already said, it's going to be covered with a plaster of some kind, and just an extra bit of a weatherproofing. A gypsum plaster would suffice. Gypsum sets very heavily and is really quite well wearing. Gypsum plaster. And then what you can do, you can paint it over. You can graffiti over it. And what we do see is some buildings with graffiti actually on the gypsum plaster, telling us that going back as far as the 1500s, that sufficed, for nearly 500 years. The infill material has lasted for 500 years. That tells you something. Not only the timber has lasted, the framework has lasted, but the infill has lasted a considerable length of time as well. Whew, bit exhausted now, non-stop talking. So what I'd like to do, show you some nice colorful images. So let's just stop that there. And I've stopped my screen sharing. And what I'd like to do now is, let's just bring that up, and I'm just going to quickly, we're screen sharing. What are we seeing on the screen share now, folks? Let's see if I can get the right screen share. So well, big, right, we can see a building, yeah?
Yeah.
Good. And again, if you're not getting full clarity out of this, then this is being recorded, so don't worry about it. This will be with you. Now, we looked at this last week, a full crux building. Nice, love it. We did this last week, and we also ended with this. So you could basically say this is a bit of a base crux. When we looked at the base crux last week, big difference between a full crux and a base crux. And we'll just explain what that is again, just as a bit of a reminder. So the difference is a base crux would have a plinth and would go all the way up to the tie beam and it would stop. This one has basically got a full crux, but has got a base on a padstone. So, okay, we'll just refer this as a full crux, more or less, a pseudo full crux. But again, what we do see is there are lots of survivors, and it's a wonder that this has actually survived externally. You just want to go in there and put some kind of preservative on there. You really, really do. When I used to live down in Sussex for a very short while, I actually had a membership card to the Sussex Archaeological Society, and it was some really nice old buildings that they had in their care. And one thing what they had was that they had panels basically made up of daub. You know, when we looked at cob, basically cob. That's one thing I mentioned. You could have within the framework, within the panels, you could actually have cob, basically mud, clay, and straw built up, and you'd render it over. One building that I was looking at was actually belonged to one of the wives of Henry VIII. One of them, can't remember which house. So that gives it a bit of a date. It goes into early, middle 1500s. And I love looking at this building wall. And the reason why I love looking at this building wall was because you used to have these worker bees that would make their nests into the panel work, and they would fly in and out. And you're thinking, well, my God, their families, these little bees, these bees have been doing this for years and years and years, probably as early as when this cob walling was actually put there nearly 500 years ago. Wonderful to think of that. Now, doesn't that look absolutely beautiful? This is that building. We saw that. So when we go, there you go, front elevation, gable elevation, bit of modern stuff on the left. And there you go. This is Hall in the Wood Bolton. Isn't she absolutely beautiful? So if we go back to looking at some of the elaborate forms. So if you want to sort of just a little bit of a recap. So this on the side is your close paneling. So we mentioned that these are your ornamental paneling. Look at how advanced that ornamental paneling is. And they really wanted to show off you. They had the money to do it. They had the timber to do it. And within that paneling, you've got wattle framework, or you've got cob walling there as well. Basically, this is based on a stone base. So it gives it a little bit more longevity. There's no rotting of the timbers inside, hence there's no rotting to the panel work. It's lasted a very, very long time. Love this structure. And Hall in the Wood Bolton. Really, really beautiful structure, this one. Doesn't she look wonderful? And you think of this building, she's been there hundreds and hundreds of years. Now, sorry to sort of rush this and sort of fudge over a few things. Got lots of little images to go through. This is that building in Stafford, ancient high house. And you're looking, think about all the changes that's had. And if you want to think about, so what we've got, again, we've got the ornamental paneling, lots of ornamental paneling, and it really stands out. It really, really does. And again, this has survived 350, 400 years as it is. When you think about it as well, you go to places like Cowbridge in the Vale of Glamorgan, some of those houses on the main high street, actually, Cowbridge is divided. Main high street is Eastgate, High Street, Westgate. In the High Street area, you do have some buildings that date all the way back to the end of the 1600s, 1700s, and they're described as jetty buildings. But what they've done with them, you've got the jetty and that protrudes, and then you've got the shop front that moves into the overhang of the jetty in. So you miss the jetty and altogether, but they do exist still in Cowbridge, mark my words. But unfortunately, the likes of Bridgend, we lost a lot. There were some of those buildings I know probably still stand in the 1950s, 60s. They were all ripped out and demolished, which is a bit of a shame. So I think the biggest phase for the destruction of these buildings was actually in the 1950s, 60s. When I'm talking about 3,000 of these types of buildings standing from the late medieval period, Tudor period, so 500 years, we've probably lost half of them since the 1950s. So let's say we've lost about 3,000. It's the same with lots of things. The great move in the 1950s and 60s for change. Let's put concrete blocks up everywhere. And lots of those concrete blocks haven't lasted 30 to 40 years. Now, those buildings that they replaced had been there for 500 years. So the regrets of those planners back in the day. So what I did, and when Pam actually watches this video, she went off and did a little bit of homework, and she said, right, this is the Hendra Wenban from Llanrwst from the 1600s. And I just thought, I love looking at this because it sort of showed how a crux frame building may have been erected. But I tell you what, they wouldn't get away with that today. Look at the lack of health and safety. No helmets to be seen. And you know, I was looking at the way that this was erected. They couldn't have done this like this in the past, because can you imagine, as soon as these people have managed to push this timber a bit further over, they're going to lose grip and they're going to fall down. Surely it just didn't make sense. And I'm thinking, look at the numbers actually involved in the reconstruction of this. There's at least 20 there. And I'm thinking maybe the people in the past would have used far less people to be able to do this, because they were so well skilled. As soon as you got the gable end arrangement up, all you've then got to do is put this, creating the first bay, connect the timbers up, Bob's your uncle, it's all put together. Just like that. I've actually been putting a little bit of an extension on the side of the house. I knew when I'd put the main principal beams in, it was easy, and it was. One thing I learned, guys, is that my dad, carpenter, right? I watched my dad when I was a child, and I could never replicate anything that my dad did as a child, because I always used nails. And then as I started screwing things in, everything goes together easy. And it's the same with these buildings. When you've got the sense of the mortise and tenon joint, and you've got the pegs that are being used and all the rest of it, equivalent to sort of screws, or whatever way you want to look at it, or that way of building. In my head, it's sort of the same, the way it fits, watching my dad. You can learn so much from the way they constructed these buildings in the past to really help us today, to be honest with you. It really seems to go. I appreciate what Pam did in showing me this. I really love this image. I really, really do. And again, that building we mentioned, it's probably a bit out of order now. That ancient high house again. Doesn't she look beautiful? So in other words, in a moment, you squint your eyes and say, wow, you're looking way back into the 1700s, going into the 1600s. You remove the shop front below, right? And you've just taken this bit, and it really comes into what we're seeing. I really love it. There it is, looking down at the high house. And to be honest with you, I would like to be very bold and saying, oh wait, we'll date this into the 1600s and beyond as well. But before that, I would like to say that this is probably a similar date. I really would, probably more into the 1700s. But these two buildings are really old, really nice buildings within each other. And even though what we do, we've got a little bit of an example when we look at the likes of Abergavenny. And we look at Abergavenny. We've got a similar building to the one on the left in Abergavenny. Love it. I do like Abergavenny. And when I take Michelle down to Glastonbury, which is a bit of a surprise for her, when we go down to Glastonbury, we're going to see if we can find some of these jetty buildings, and they do exist in Glastonbury on the front there, in the main high street. Oh God, calm down. I'm going to order a drink. Michelle, is there any chance of a little drinky poos, please, darling? Something wet. Now, when we've mentioned these buildings in Britain, and this is actually an example in the Netherlands, and what we can clearly see is, again, that sense of jetty, and it's not massively protruding jettying, but again, it gives a good idea of date. And I'm really looking for, oh, look at that jetty in there. Oh God, it really speaks volumes. It really, really does. And you know what? I nearly avoided. I nearly didn't do jettying then, which is a bit naughty of me. But we've got to do jettying. So here we go. That's a real jetty building. One of the unique features of box frame construction is the rising sequence of increasingly large boxes set one on top of the other, forming the jetty building. So in other words, if you've got a small box at the bottom and it's balanced and supported, you can put another box on top of that, all load bearing all load bearing, all the beams are sort of all living and creaking together. So you can have a smaller box at the bottom, bigger box above that, gives you the form of jettying. And it basically is a bit like balancing cards, but in the right way. So jettied buildings, boxes on top of each other, they get bigger the further you go up. A building form having antecedents, I can't say the word, antecedences from the 1300s. So this is a style of jettying, the idea of jettying from the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s. In other words, people had a small plot. Think about it, a small plot in a medieval town. They're thinking, this is all I've bloody got. But what I can do, if I go upwards, you can overhang the timbers out over the street. And then you can overhang those timbers out over the street again. So when you go to York, the medieval streets of York are quite wide at the base. But when you look up, you get claustrophobic because it gets narrower and narrower as you go up. That's what I like about York. It's got a really nice sense of age in regards, thank you very much for that, Michelle, in regards to the likes of York. So box frame building with the jettying protruding, it is something very much which is still massively in vogue into the early 1600s. Probably going out then when you've got the tall, massive buildings, the townhouses sort of developing in places like Edinburgh, places like Cambridge, and lots of other locations on the planet. But the thing is, what's happening is these early buildings continue to be seen in our towns and cities. Thankfully, they're not all wiped out. Places like York, they're not all wiped out. Do you know what? I've got another mistress, right? It's York. I love the place. A number of practical advantages have been suggested for the introduction of jettying. Chief among these are the fact that it enabled wall loads to counterbalance floor loads more effectively. It enabled individual posts to be introduced at each story and enabled each story box to be a contained unit of carpentry, box on top of a box. Another common reason advanced is that in congested urban areas, it enabled extra floor space to be added in the upper stories. Notwithstanding these arguments, the appearance of jetty buildings in rural areas suggests one of the main reasons for its introduction may have been as a display feature which increasingly appeared to the populous taste of the 1500s. So in other words, in the rural areas where you've got plenty of room, you've got to get there with the Joneses. You've got to do what they're doing in the urban areas of the towns. You don't need to do jetty in the countryside, but because they're doing it in the towns, you've got to do it. So in the towns, it's for a practical reason. In the countryside, it's to show off. We look at the amount of timber that we've got. So a writer known as Brunskill, Brunskill's writing in 1997, Brunskill, he says about jettying, with its rich pattern of light and shade in receding surfaces, was a simple form of decoration that appealed to the late medieval mind. So in other words, the form itself can act as light and shade, as in decoration, as in regards to the panel work of those great houses that we might see with the likes. I've got to remind myself at Hall in the Wood, Bolton. So in other words, where Hall in the Wood, Bolton is doing all that elaborate work on timber work on the front of the structure, when you've got jettying being really introduced, you can not only have that elaborate work, you can use a lot more timber, and you can have jettying, and you can have a bigger building up above, and you don't really need it in the countryside, but they're doing it anyway. Let's just get with the Joneses. In Barry, we just wouldn't bother. Would we, Richard? No, we wouldn't. We couldn't be asked. No, exactly. Thanks for being in agreement on that one. So, and basically another thing to be said about rural houses in Hertfordshire. Here we go. Which our writer, let me remember, it's Brunskill, isn't it? Yeah, Brunskill. When Brunskill's writing in 1997, it basically said a structural feature which was undoubtedly prized for its visual impact and conveyed a certain prestige, also written by Smith in 1992. So basically what we're seeing there is that these writers agree, Brunskill and Smith agree, that it's for impact and conveying a certain prestige using jettying in the countryside. It's not really needed, but why not? Let's just go with the Joneses. Take a little slurp. Amazingly enough, we've actually covered quite a lot tonight. So now, which one is this? I think this is the one that Bill's been to. This is called Little Morton. And actually, Little Morton is a bit queer. And why is it queer? Right. We can answer that one. Little Morton goes against the standard. Let me show you this. Let's get a little bit of that in there. Good. Right, let's draw. So basically, what you've got all this elaborate work at Little Morton, and you've got jettying, nice, not massively jettying, and then what they then do is they have a gallery upstairs, which sort of tapers inwards, which goes against the jettying rule. So in other words, this is an aristocrat saying, right, you know, I can do this in my own way. I can have a nice slender gallery upstairs, but that's not really how jettying should work. It needs to be counterbalanced in boxes. So whoever's done this has tapered it inwards. And then when you look inside, something really strange happens. Now that's Little Morton again. They really become elaborate. They've used all the architectural styles. They really want to show off a little bit of a courtyard, really nice. And look at that. And you can actually see that it's wonky. Instead of actually having a bigger floor upstairs than the floor below, they've actually tapered inwards. And for whatever reason, this has distorted the flow of the gallery upstairs. It looks like a really nice gallery. And if I can remember right, I've spoken to somebody and you can almost see down below because it doesn't have all the proper counterbalances and weights, having a narrower upfloor instead of having a larger box upstairs, which goes against the rule of the jettying principle. And it's really interesting. You can see that paneling, lovely paneling. It's amazing that this has actually survived after 500 years. It really, really is. But look at that. It's like something in a Harry Potter movie. It really, really is. That this jettying effect and the early levels and the age and the timber distorting and so on and so on. It's still standing today. But I don't think I would want to stay there. I'm sure at night it would be creaking and all sorts of things would be going on. But again, Little Morton, look it up. It'd be a nice little read. And I'm going to send Richard there with Pauline. And yeah, that'll be a day out for you, Richard. I'd go to Little Morton. Now, also, what was mentioned as well, I thought this was actually a better image, but I'm not going to moan. This is also another one from Pam. So what we do have there is we don't really have the jettying principle, but what we've got is an extended porch. This building dates from 1435 from Nant Clwyd Idre and Ruthin. And this almost wants to get to jettying, but it's not there. So this is that panel framework on the exterior. I think if I'm writing saying this could be a crux frame building, I'm not exactly sure what that paneling actually covers, but it wouldn't be standing like that if it wasn't for substantial beams underneath all that. And I think that's really interesting how that's developed in the vernacular style in Ruthin, North Wales. And she also sent me this, the old mayor's house in Machynlleth. And I'm not really sure if that's there anymore. If it is, I've not seen it. But again, this is quite on a lower floor. It's not ostentatious like the other buildings that we've seen, but nevertheless, it classifies some of the crux forms, some of the paneling form, some of the forms that we've actually seen tonight and the previous week. So what I'd like to do now is I would like to stop the sharing, and I did promise a bit of geophysics. So what I'm going to ask now is if we've got a little bit of time to do geophysics tonight. So I'd like any comments about what we've just seen, just a little bit of time from each of you. Anything you'd like to say, Richard?
No, not really.
Okay, Bill, you've been to Little Morton, haven't you? Oh, sorry, Rich, go.
I was just going to say the photos, I sent those to you.
Oh, it was
Wagons.
Oh, right. Sorry, Pam. Thank you, Richard.
You changed my name. No.
You do look a bit feminine. I know Pauline wears the trousers in your house, so there you go. So, Bill, sorry for that, Rich. Bill, anything? Little Morton, you've been to Little Morton, haven't you?
Little Morton Hall, yeah. Now, the top viewing gallery, which shows clear sign of subsidence, the house, I think built in the early Tudor period, didn't have the viewing gallery at all. But sometime during the Tudor period, viewing galleries became very popular. And it amazed me a means of the ladies of the house in particular to take some exercise by walking during bad weather. So viewing galleries were added generally to the top of the building. And this was the case with Little Morton Hall. But what they didn't do, they didn't assess the total weight of the building, especially with the heavy stone tiled roof. And as a result, it put the timbers underneath, the supporting timbers of the bottom two floors under great strain. And as a result, over the centuries, the whole thing subsided. And if you walk into the entrance to the viewing gallery today, you walk uphill for about 18 inches, then flat, it drops off again. Now, sometime during the 1960s, the National Trust took possession of the building. They recognized the problem, and long term, the whole thing would collapse. So what they did, they took the inner paneling away, and between that and the inner wall, running horizontally the full length of the viewing gallery either side, they put steel stanchions. And below that, they put stanchions, support stanchions going down to ground level, again between the inner walls of the lower floors to support the whole structure. So the whole structure now looks as if it will collapse, but it's totally safe and stable. And it's certainly atmospheric there. It's a wonderful building to visit. It really is. It does creak, but it breathes straight, really does. If you ever get a chance to go there, go there.
Oh, I tell you what, you've just sold it.
Where is it? Is it the Cotswolds?
No, it's the Chester area, North Derbyshire, Chester.
Chester.
Yeah.
Oh, North Derbyshire, did you say? Chesterfield?
Yeah. If you punch in Little Morton Hall, it'll come out. It's that area. North Derbyshire, Cheshire, around there.
I know. Or it's a pity it's not Cotswolds.
Yeah, you'd be there. And anything you'd like to say? Because I want to do a little bit about geophysics. Anything?
No, I'm just going to say we stayed in Webley one year with our kids. And
did you see that building?
To look at all the, yeah, we saw it. Yeah, it was nice.
Excellent.
Nice.
Nice. Jessica, anything?
No, I just thought it was interesting, how looking at a building can sort of talk about, the economy of an area back in that period, and also look at how how that sort of impacted society. You can go down a social archaeology route just from looking at architecture, and I just think that's amazing.
Wow.
Exactly. So what we're going to do, the last bit tonight, right? Well, we got just over 10 minutes to look at geophysics, so we'll get through this. What I want to do is geophysics, a little bit of geophysics this week, a little bit of geophysics next week, and then we're back into a little bit more of the excavation. So I just muted me then, so I'll just keep Jess on as well, so that'll be fine. So 1, 2, 3, let's get my screen on, and excellent. Geophysics. Oh, do you know what I've forgotten to do? I've forgotten to show you the trading post in Abergavenny. Right, okay. That was part of something else I want to show you. So I've got the images to show you this now. So I'm just gonna, if I can screen share on 3, 2, 1. Now, there are 2 buildings in Abergavenny called the Trading Post. I've worked out it's not this one. It's actually, hang on a minute, where's it gone? Oh, hang on. Oh, it's something funny going on a minute. Hang on, stop. It was going so well. Right, let's just try and get the image of the Trading Post up. Hang on, let's just, let's stop a minute, calm down. It will all work out on the night. Trading Post. Where have I put this image for the Trading Post? It's disappeared. Oh, fiddlesticks. Hang on a minute. I'm just, technical error. I'm just going to get this image up here a minute. Trading Post. I knew I had the wrong building. Trading Post. Abergavenny. Bear with me. Excellent. Videos. There it is. Brilliant. I'm going to save that to my files, and it's going to go there. It's saved, and now I'm going to show you. Bingo. Right, let's screen share. 3, 2, 1. Good. Those of you who have been to Abergavenny, this is another building called the Trading Post in Abergavenny, and this is a jetty building. And there are a number of jetty buildings in Abergavenny, and this building, referred to as the Trading Post, is a listed building naturally. There's also ones by the town hall in the centre. This building has its origins in the beginning of the 1600s. It's classed as a continuous jettied house, which was heightened and refronted in the 1700s. And it's got a little label saying there 1780. It is said to have been built as the townhouse of the Vaughan family of Tretower Court in the 1600s, whose arms bear on the carved oriels, and it was remodeled as the Cow and Temperance Inn, which is known to have been in use in the 1870s. And it's obviously been converted since, and they've stuccoed and painted over it. But I just wanted to show you that as a nearby example of a jetty building. And there's a lot more about it there. And it's just, and this talk about the designs on, hang on, let me just get that word back in there. Oh, the carved oriels, the design on that. So if I get back to the image, hang on, there we go. It's not the ones above the windows, actually. I think that's what they're talking about. But if you do get to Abergavenny, look at that building. It's called the Trading Post. It's off. Hang on a minute. Is it on the main high street or off the main high street? I think it's off a side street, but you can clearly see that there's 2 buildings that I've worked out are called the Trading Post in Abergavenny, which makes it a bit confusing. So what I'd like to do now is I would like to get directly to geophysics, and let's see where we are with this. And right, good. And right, so today we're going to look at, this is actually a geophysical survey from Barcombe. And what you can see is the archaeologists who have undertaken the geophysical survey. look at how much data is in that field. You can look at the outlines of a Roman fort. You can see the arrangement of the fort. You can actually see lots of street patterns. And if you want to compare this with, say, for example, let's get this in there. If you want to say you can't see anything in that field, but you can't see anything in that field, but when you look at the bit of the field that's been geophysed, look at all the data in there, post holes, so much evidence. So geophysical survey really assists us in understanding the archaeological landscape without putting a single spade in the ground. Archaeological excavation is destructive. Archaeological excavation is very expensive, and you've got all those artifacts to deal with and everything else. So geophysics is a really cheap method of examining a landscape without having to spend a lot of money on excavating it. I'm going to do a little bit of text. Won't be able to get through all of it today, but geophysics can identify modern features. There you go, pipeline, Roman features, pits that could be associated with burials or could be associated with storage. Again, look at that. You can see another little bit of a pit. You can see little enclosures, circular features, and so on and so on. So geophysics is very, very useful, a very, very useful aid to archaeologists. Lots of books being published, geophysics and archaeology. And geophysics has been really popular very much since it was first shown on Time Team in 1984. No, 1984, 1994. I knew about geophysics before that, but it was just a growing science. But it was massively used on Time Team in the, was it 200 episodes that they had of Time Team or somewhere like that? In practically every single episode, they had the geophysics guys in Time Team. They used it and showed it as a wonderful tool, really helping us understand the landscape without having to excavate everything. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to share another bit of screen. So new share. And I think that's it. No, we've already done that. Let's just put the other one on. Let's just try and get this in. Lots of things open. There is a nice little bit of a text. Let's see if I can screen share that now. Yeah, brilliant, excellent. Brilliant. So what are you seeing on the screen now, Jessica?
Geophysical techniques.
Nice. Now, this itself is from Historic England. Geophysics techniques. And in about 7 minutes, I will be having my dinner. So I'm going to spend a few minutes on this and we'll have a couple of questions and we'll call it a day. So we're not going to rush this bit. So we'll just read this out. Geophysical techniques. The main geophysical methods used for archaeological survey are briefly described down below. All involve the systematic collection of measurements at closely spaced intervals across the area under investigation. This is followed by the visual display of the combined data, usually on a computer monitor, data sets that are then analyzed and interpreted for archaeological information. I think the most classic way of portraying how accurate geophysical survey is, that I can remember that they had a field that they were doing a geophysical survey on in one of the cities. I think it might have actually been Colchester, I'm not sure. And I can remember them going across the land and they came up with this wonderful thing. And basically it showed a line with a loop in it and another line. And they said, oh, wow, look what we found. We found a Roman basilica. And then somebody said, actually, you haven't found a Roman basilica. Those lines that you've actually shown on the screen are actually the lines that were created and now sort of grassed over. It's actually a football pitch. So when I say it's really accurate, they were able to work out that the field was used as a football pitch up until really recently, and the lines were clearly shown on it. So even though that sounds absolutely ludicrous, it shows you how accurate geophysical surveying can be to find minutiae of changes as long as the technology advances. So we see this image down below, and this is a little machine on a sledge. It's great, love it. So you can sit on there all day, and a vehicle towed caesium magnetometry array in operation at the site known as Cartridge, and this would be used to survey an absolutely massive field. And obviously you get to that fence post and you go back around, and you get to the fence post, go back around. It creates a grid across the field. So magnetometry survey offers the most rapid ground coverage and records a variety of anomalies caused by past human activity. So that's what we're looking at. It is therefore the most widely used geophysical survey technique for archaeological investigation, magnetometry survey. The data is most commonly collected by a flux gate gradiometer. Used to hear these terms again in time team. This instrument records subtle changes in the local magnetic field continuously across the site and allows large areas to be covered in a relatively short time. Changes in magnetic fields, anomalies are produced when buried features exhibit different magnetic properties to the surrounding soil. Archaeological remains such as hearths, kilns, furnaces can be detected due to the alteration of iron minerals by burning into strongly magnetic forms. So in other words, the magnetism created by hearths, kilns, and furnaces is detected by the flux gate gradiometer. Ditches and pits can be located when they are silted up with more magnetic topsoil from adjacent settlements. So there's a buildup of magnetic material in ditches. So that's what's being detected by the magnetometer. Can detect buried wall footings, but only when the magnetic properties of the stone contrast with the surrounding soil. You can imagine if a wall's made of ironstone, bloody hell, that's going to show up. Cesium or alkaline vapor gradiometers are more sensitive instruments than standard flux gate gradiometers. As a result, they can be used to detect weaker anomalies from the more subtle remains or those buried at a greater depth. And on that note, we're going to finish on this image. An example of the resulting data from a survey over a henge monument and bronze barrow group in the Vale of Pewsey, Wiltshire. And sorry, when you're looking at that, quick interpretation, that there is going to, hang on, that's going to, if I'm getting this interpretation right, barrow, that's going to be a ditch associated with the barrow. And look at these as well. These look to me like they're indicating ditches. And I'm sure if we go by what that said earlier on, that might be an electric line there coming in there. So that's been detected. And what you can see rather interestingly is circles. Are these roundhouses or something else? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to finish there. Geophysics next week. And finally, let's just see, I'm really looking forward to my dinner. Let's just see if there's any questions from Jessica.
No questions. I thought it was quite interesting. Never, don't really know much about geophysics, so I want to look into that.
That's what we're doing next week.
Happy days.
Happy days all the way. You can tell you've been in Cardiff too long. Right, Bill. At least you don't get your car nicked in Cardiff, unlike my stink. Bill.
Yeah, well, when Tony Robinson with Time Team used to go on and on about geophys, he didn't explain what it is. He just showed pictures of people doing things. So I assume geophys covered two categories, aerial photography and ground penetrating radar.
No, two separate categories.
Right.
if you want to do geophys as aerial photography, you could look at LiDAR and then you could classify it as geophys.
So geophys then is ground penetrating radar only.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Right.
You could.
And how does that equate to magnetometers? Is it the same thing?
These are the same things. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Fluxscape.
Yeah.
Fluxscape. Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we'll try and look a little bit more about that next week. The problem is this subject is quite engrossing, so we'll see what we can do next week with it. Annie Panny.
Yeah, that was a good start. You know, good introduction. I kind of understood the you said the magnetic properties of the stone, the contrast between the soil and the magnetic it sort of made sense.
So
good.
yeah, it makes that's exactly the best example, because when the background soil hasn't been disturbed, it's got a certain signature. But then with human beings, you've got all the iron, you've got all the crap we produce, the magnetic properties of, and you chuck that in a ditch, it's going to shine up like a beacon.
Right. Good.
So Richard Babes, you got the last. Good. I do as well. It'd be something good, and I'm sure you all do. Richard Baby, go on, give it to us. You got the last word.
Oh no, really interesting. Good start on it,
More next week.
A bit more. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we're going to do next week. That's geophysics next week, and see if I can get some nice geophysical plans of different areas. And do you know, one good thing would be to get one of Chilean with the Roman stuff. We could really look at that. That'd be great. Chilean geophys. I'll see what I can dig up. So if there's no questions, I'm going to say what a wonderful Thursday evening, unlike last week. And I'm going to. I've actually.
Have you dinner?
I'm gonna have my dinner. I've got a little device in front of me now. If it all goes wrong, this little device will give us internet connection. So there we go.
Oh.
So we all want to know what you're having for dinner.
Yeah. What are you having for dinner?
Well, I put the pies on earlier on. I got pies and I've got. What are the fries, Michelle? Are they?
Pie and chips.
Pie and chips, yeah. Some peas. We'll have some peas.
We had that yesterday.
Yeah, pie, chips, and peas.
Oh, it's getting worse. Pie and chips.
Is it?
Yeah, and they're shop bought pies, aren't they?
Yeah, they're Linda McCartney. Got to be done.
Yeah.
Oh no, I like the pies in the tin.
Oh,
yes.
The Frey Bentos. I used to love them.
God, I used to love those.
I used to love those, yeah.
I could eat the whole one on my own now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wonder if they got a vegetarian Frey Bentos. Probably.
It used to go between a family at one time.
I fly the flag for corned beef pie.
True, fair enough.
I'm hungry now. I'm hungry.
We're all hungry. And one last thing. We got somewhere wonderful to stay in York, and we're just walking distance from the cathedral.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, that's good.
So, we're looking forward to that.
I get my vaccination by then.
Oh, yeah.
There's one bed left.
All right. Okay.
It's in a shared room though with Bill. No, Bill's the only single Bill, you've got the only single room this time.
Have I?
Yeah, everyone's sharing.
Oh.
Well, I don't know. What do I share with?
Is there more women going?
I think so. No, there's actually more men. There's actually more men. Yeah.
Oh.
So
right. Gonna be dinner then.
I'm having my dinner. So everybody, I'm going to say good night. I'll see you all next week. Remember, we've got the walk next Tuesday, St. Quintin's Castle at 10 o'clock in the morning. Other than that, I will see you either on Wednesday, Thursday. Brilliant. See you, Richard. See you, Anne, Jessica, and Bill. Night, night.
Bye.
Night. See you. Bye. Night, night.
Nosta.
Nas da chi, diolch yn fawr i chi, croeso. Nas da. See you, Rich. See you next week.
So long.
So long, so long. Thank you for joining and watching this lecture today. Hopefully it's been of and don't forget, if you'd like to join my classes, there you can join it on www.archaeologycymruonline.weebly.co.uk. Down there in the box, you can click onto the website, and live in Chepstow, if you want to book on my website, www.KARL-JAMES.com. And many thanks for joining me today. So it's over and out from Karl James Langford. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much. Blast. More next week, Geophysics.